Great to be here. It's been 2 years since I've been to Krakow on a meetup, but it's still cool to see some familiar faces. So for me, you're in the dark, but before the event, I saw some of the familiar faces. But if you have some reactions or questions during the event, feel free to interrupt or to raise your hand. Um, Let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Dominik. I'm a Flutter GDE, and currently I work at the startup called Visible. We are building a platform for chronic illness, and our main thing that we have is a wearable tracker, Bluetooth device that people with long COVID or chronic fatigue syndrome and some other illnesses use to help them go through their life. And it's mainly a Flutter app, and it's going really well. So if you know someone who would need something like this, go check out our website. As mentioned, Flutter GDE, and if you are into some Flutter content, I would say once a year, on average, you can check out my website and my newsletter, where I sometimes share some Flutter bits and bobs. Before we start, I'm going to have a couple of questions to you, just to kind of learn how well you know about the Flutter plugins infrastructure. What does it mean to use native APIs? So my first question would be, do you use any Flutter plugins? One person in the back. So only one person. No, more people. So have you ever written your own Flutter plugin? So who has written their own Flutter plugin by themselves? Cool. I can see that I would say 1/3 of the room had some reaction. So I think that's on par with what I've seen on other events. Has anyone here used FFI, Dart FFI? 2, 3 people, which is good. So today I'm going to talk about this a little bit more. So I hope you will get you will leave energized and motivated to try it out. But I'm going to show you a bit different approach than probably was normally advertised in different events and shows so far. One thing that for me about Flutter is really great, that I think none of the other cross-platform solutions has built in such a convenient way, is Flutter plugins. Often when someone asks me why I would recommend using Flutter, it's because there is no kind of boundaries, no challenge, like real big challenges to integrate with the native platform in a way that, for instance, I remember from using Xamarin or later Maui. So if anyone used Xamarin a couple years ago, they know how difficult it would be to, for instance, get access to your native project. Whereas with Flutter, a bit also with React Native, but not with Expo, you essentially get access to your underlying native project, and with some asterisks, you're able just to open this in Android Studio or Xcode and just open it up, which is amazing. For me, that's a extremely convenient thing to have. And it also means that you can easily access your native code, your Kotlin, your Swift, you can write the code. And with the plugin infrastructure, if you need to use some API, again, with some asterisks, it doesn't really, it isn't really difficult. And oftentimes when you see these comparisons about like between Flutter and React Native, or again, a few years ago, it would be Flutter versus Cordova or Flutter versus Xamarin. I think that this access to the native platform is really important. And for instance, we have an app that uses a Bluetooth connection with the wearable band. And for us, it was very important to be able to get access to all of the possible Bluetooth APIs that we need, to the libraries that often they don't really have a Flutter version. So if you try to integrate with, for instance, we're using a company called Polar, and they don't really have any Flutter library. So what you have to do is you just essentially have to use the SDK that is provided for iOS and Android. The same applies to our different SDK that we use, which is a camera reading for a finger. Like you can read your heart rate from a finger when you put it on the camera. So this SDK also doesn't have any Flutter wrapper. So it was very important for us to be able to access these APIs directly. And also for the performance reasons, for instance, we have a foreground service on Android. It was very important to be able to access that just write the foreground service in Kotlin, because it doesn't really make sense to spin up Flutter and run it in the background. Anyway, this all comes to a little bit of an overview of ways to integrate with the native platform. Obviously, you have seen probably all of the possible APIs to work with plugins. So first of all, you can use method channels and event channels, which essentially is just message passing. You have some payload and you try to pass it from Flutter engine to a native platform. There's many different ways how you can encode this. You can send a JSON and just send this as a binary stream of data. You can have your custom codec. So for instance, if you know like that you want to compress your data a little bit more, you can write your own codec. Or let's say you're sending binary data. It doesn't make sense to save it, convert it to JSON and pass it as a, let's say, base 64 encoded string. You would prefer to send the bytes directly, and so on and so forth. And what is nice about this API is that you just write it on the Flutter side, you just write the handler on the native side, and it just works. And obviously, there are some caveats here and things that potentially can go wrong, but in general, it's very easy to follow and understand if you know what you look for. There have been some ways to improve that. So maybe you have heard about a tool called Pigeon, and this is a tool from the Flutter team that was meant to help out with building contracts between Flutter and the native side. So normally when you have a plugin and you want to send some piece of data to the native side, you need to create the model on the Flutter side, on the native side. Typically, a lot of the plugins that you will see in the wild, it's just someone typing the JSON manually on the Flutter side and then trying to parse it manually on the native side. And obviously, it's error prone. If you have more people in a team or you're changing the model continuously, it will not work. So you need to have a way to generate this code or create the, have some contract somewhere and then generate corresponding models from that. And Pigeon is trying to solve that for Flutter. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan. And then I've seen ways to use protobufs and more recently flat buffers to have even more strict contracts that are not really dependent on Dart, Kotlin, Swift, etc. And I think 2 years ago, about that time, Dart FFI was announced, and this was another step to get access to the, to pass data or get access to some APIs natively. There's a couple great things about it. For instance, synchronous access. So normally with method channels and Pigeon and everything else, even if it takes 1 nanosecond to pass the data, it will be a synchronous API. So you cannot use it in a synchronous code. Whereas with Dart FFI, you can fairly easy get access to synchronous invocations. So for instance, if you want to get access to the current battery level, on Android, it's a synchronous API. You get the response immediately. Whereas if you use it for the plugin, you have to wait for the micro task to finish. And today I'm going to show you some other ways that I've been exploring recently. And this is actually what makes me really excited about the future of this field in Flutter. So as mentioned, method channels and event channels. So method channels are used for kind of one-time sending data. Whereas with event channels, you can subscribe for changes. And what is cool, it works both ways. You can create an event channel that sends data continuously from Flutter to native, and also send data from native to Flutter, like for instance, I'm going to show you in a demo in a second. And as mentioned, this is always async. This is an example code. You've seen this probably many times, but I just wanted to showcase this asynchronous nature of that. So we have the a bit of, so at the top there's Dart code, at the bottom there's, I believe, Kotlin. And as you can see, for instance, the problem here is that you have to define the method name just as a string. Again, error prone, you can miss a letter or anything like that. You can send primitives this way or maps, but not really anything more complex. For that, you would have to either encode it as a JSON or have a custom codec. And yeah, this is on the native side. It's super simple to set up because you just need to get access to the Flutter engine and that's all. And you can just receive these messages through that. Some people ask about the performance of that, because you're just essentially passing that a lot of data back and forth, and there is some claims saying that this is unperformant, but in reality you probably never really have to worry about it. So for instance, here's a snake game that uses accelerometer readings, and you can see that even at the highest refresh rate, which is 12 milliseconds, 20 milliseconds. So this is the fastest that accelerometer can provide. It still works just fine. You can see that the UI updates as fast as it can. So this is on a 120 hertz screen, and it just works as fast as the accelerometer reading is provided from the device. And obviously this is simple data, just 3 digits essentially, 3 numbers. But 3 times 4, sorry. Yes, but nonetheless, it's not a lot of data to pass. You will see some issues with the method channels. For instance, if you try to send texture, like an image, continuously from the camera, this will not work. If you need to send more than, let's say, a few dozen kilobytes at every frame, you may notice some frame drops, some jittering. But for this kind of use cases, or if you send, like in our case, we continuously send some data from the Bluetooth device, it works just fine. For the Pigeon and other tools that allow you to create this more defined contracts. So I already hinted that I don't really enjoy this. Obviously, everyone can have their own preferences when it comes to I would say different habits and code conventions. But with Pigeon, my biggest problem is that you have this extra file where you define your contract, where you define your schema, and then out of that, Dart code and Kotlin code and Swift code gets created. And this Dart code, this special file, doesn't have, for instance, appropriate syntax completion. I understand where is it coming from, but realistically, aside from official Flutter plugins, I haven't seen this used a lot in the wild. I really would like to see some community plugins that use Pigeon extensively, but I haven't found one. If you know one, please let me know. And one thing that for me is like makes me really envious of other toolkits is that they have something that we haven't had, and we may have it in Flutter, but we still don't have it in a productionized form. So for instance, whenever you use compose multi-platform, there's always a question: how do I access Swift code from Kotlin? How can I interact with underlying iOS platform? So compose multi-platform is a variant of cross-platform technology that allows you to use Kotlin and Android toolkit, toolchain to build apps for mobile and desktop, and probably soon also for web, which is very similar to Flutter. And you may call Compose Multi-Platform a competitor of Flutter. They have something that we don't really have yet, which is a bridge from Kotlin to Swift in a way where a lot of the built-in libraries is already exposed, and if the native API is synchronous, it's also synchronous on the Kotlin side. And it means that, for instance, you can see on the left-hand side there is a snippet from an experiment that they did, which allows you to create Swift UI views using Kotlin, and then render them as Swift UI views, which is for me kind of crazy because Swift UI is its own black box where you don't really have access to a lot of the things outside of the public API, but you can essentially, through the magic of Java and Kotlin, get access to that. And also, if you just use any Kotlin library for Kotlin multi-platform library, you get access to Swift Interop by essentially importing Apple libraries or iOS libraries, like for instance in this particular case Foundation, which means you get access to NS user defaults, you get access to camera, you get access to notification center, you get access to app delegate, stuff like that, just in Kotlin, which means you don't really have to change your IDE, you don't have to change your habits. Obviously, the syntax will be a bit different, but especially for plugin maintainers, or if you want to get access from this code for yourself, it's super convenient. I tried this and it works pretty well. And obviously, there are some other ways. So this is another example. In this particular case, it's just operating on files using Swift APIs. And if you've been using Xamarin, you may recall that in Xamarin, we had a way to interact with the Android or iOS APIs directly as well. And there was a lot of magic involved. It wasn't really easy to understand how it works. But what it meant, and for me, for instance, it meant that I learned my Android development in C# first, because I was writing my Xamarin apps before I actually started doing any native development. But I could have written code like this and have my activity on Android in C#, which was, for me back then, a more familiar language than Java was. And I could, obviously, Mono and Xamarin, it's a whole different story, but you could, for instance, consume a Mono, which is a .NET flavor library on Android in an activity that was written in C#. And the same applied to iOS. Again, when I was writing my animation code with UIKit, the first time I did this, it was in C#. I was translating from Obj-c to C#, and I was able to run C# on iOS. This is an example, again, accessing files using NSURL, using NS operation queue, using files manager from iOS, but in C#. And obviously, it doesn't seem like much, but in some cases, especially if you want to just use the single API, it lets you avoid writing this boring and error-prone code of method channels. So if I would like to access this API from Flutter, currently what I would have to do is that I would have to create a plugin. I would have to create a method channel on one side, method channel on the other side, define some contract. Probably I would just do a simple manual JSON, and then I would be able to access this API asynchronously. It works, but it's not the best developer experience. And what is Flutter known for is possibly the best developer experience, but in this area, I think it's still lacking a lot compared to some other, even past tools like Xamarin, which is long dead now, and it had this ability 10 years ago. So can we finally have it in Flutter? And the good answer is that yes, we will have something like that in Flutter, hopefully as soon as possible. So if you've heard about FFI, this allows you to invoke native or like C-level libraries directly. So let's say you have a C library to generate PDFs, or you may have a C library to do some encryption. You can consume this library from Dart and get the result, call any method on that, instantiate that, dispose, and so on and so forth. And folks at Dart team are working on ways to have very similar experience, but with other languages, with Java, Kotlin, and possibly also for other platforms. So JNIGen is one of these tools that allows you to get access to Java or Kotlin libraries through something called bindings. And I'm going to show you a demo of how it actually works. So I have an app here. Let me just quickly see where I am. I'm here in PDF Viewer. I'm going to make everything bigger for you so that you can see what I'm showing. But in short, I have this Android app right here. Maybe I'm going to move it here to the left-hand side so that I'm not occluding you. And this is just a simple PDF viewer. So this is a Flutter app. Oh, sorry, I have a breakpoint, so I need to disable the breakpoint here as well. And what this app does is just showing you some PDFs. Very simple app, has some page counter. Nothing really fancy, but if you ever try to run a PDF viewer in Flutter, you know that there's like a dozen different libraries, each one with their own problems. And if you're a native developer, let's say iOS or Android, you know that typically opening a PDF is just a built-in thing. You don't, unless you want to do some custom UI, it will be very simple. And for us Flutter developers, it's often a matter of choosing a library that has been maintained, but somehow there's still like no one is responding to issues and so on and so forth. That's a different conversation, but ideally we don't have to go through some custom library just to open a PDF. So I had this mission that I wanted to just get some common library that is used to open PDFs and just try to access it directly without going through some third-party library or through method channels. And with JNIGen, you can create, essentially bring the Java code or Kotlin code to Dart and use the Java code in Dart as if this was your own Dart code. What does it mean? So on the Android side, let's have a look on the other Android side. It's super simple. I have my code here. So I have my view. It's gonna be this is Flutter PDF. Yeah. So this is my view, and what it has PDF view. PDF view comes from this library from Bartek SC. It's a common library on GitHub that you can use to open a PDF. Nothing fancy. You just get a file, define some settings, whether swipe is enabled, blah blah blah. So this is kind of typical code that you would prefer to write, have access to the low level without any hoops. I also have another class here, which is my view controller, or like PDF view controller. It has a couple of methods that I'm just proxying to my PDF view. Jump to, get page count, get current page, set swipe enabled. So I explicitly had to write these methods, unfortunately, so that they would be coming from a class that is public, that has public methods, and I can easily instantiate it without any dependencies. But here, obviously, what I'm doing is I'm just accessing a static field here. So it's a nasty code, not really probably the most testable code, but for the purposes of the demo, it works really well. So this is all Java code. It could be Kotlin code equally well. And what happened is that on the Dart side, I also have my PDF view controller. I imported this with this PDF prefix, but it doesn't have to be like that. And as you can see, this is also a class, a Dart class. What happens here, I'm just getting the bytes of the PDF. Obviously, this could be a path to the file or anything like that. And here I'm instantiating my PDF view controller. So just for it to land, I'm instantiating this class that I have here. And then I have my listener. So if I go back to my PDF viewer, my listener is notifying about page changes so that I can render this UI in Flutter. And the syntax is not the nicest just yet. Like you see all these dollar signs and Boolean flags. But I have my API here on page changed, and I'm getting the page number and the total number, and I'm just setting state to indicate this on the screen, which is super cool. What I'm doing this here as well is that I have my PDF view controller, and I am invoking a method on this PDF view controller here, and I'm just passing my listener that I just implemented here to this class. So if you go here, you will find that here's my set PDF status listener, and then it just proxying to this view that I've shown before, and here's my listener, and I'm passing this listener further down here, for instance, PDF status listener on error, on loaded, on page change. So it's a bit of glue code to make that work, but in general, I'm having this listener here on the Dart side, and what is the best of that is that it's all been generated from compilable with a syntax support Java class. There's no manual writing of that. There's no separate contract file that I had to generate it from, and all of these methods are synchronous. So I don't have to, like, if I want to get a response immediately, whether a method succeeded or not, I'm just getting this immediately. And I'm gonna just show you something else. So I'm gonna bring back my my breakpoints. So let's say I'm gonna put it here and here, and then I'm gonna put the breakpoint maybe here. So I'm going back here, opening this again. So here's my example PD view controller. So if I would just write example, maybe it doesn't show the address. Oh, here you can see address here, E75D9, and this is the memory address of this one. And then here, if I would write this to string, the address is also E75D9. You may not see that because it's pretty small, but the point is that this is the same instance of the same class. There is a bit of, I don't want to call it magic, because you can essentially just go to this class and see for yourself how it's been implemented. But if you go here, unfortunately, it's a bunch of generated class. But what is super cool about it is that this class is essentially a mirror of the Java class that is referring to the pointer of this class in memory. So anything that this class exposes can be accessed through the reference to the memory. The memory is shared between Dart and the Java in this particular case. There is a bit of synchronization probably going on. I'm not an expert in that at all. I'm going to show you some resources later. But the point is that it's been accessed directly from Dart to Java. How it's done? Again, you can go to the documentation and see for yourself, but I'm just going to show you a configuration class that I used to generate this, which is, again, super simple. I'm just having my normal Flutter app, right? So this is a lib, and I have my package, which is called just PDF. And inside of this PDF package, I have my configuration file, jnigen, where I'm just defining what kind of file I want to generate. And here, I'm just defining classes for which I want to generate this, these bindings. So I'm using PDF view controller and status listener. After that, I'm just running dart run jnigen, and it generates these bindings. Obviously, this file is huge. Maybe not huge. This has 700 lines, but for bigger projects that, for instance, currently we have, and we are using this approach in production right now with the SDK that we use for the camera readings. The vendor provided us with a compiled jar, obfuscated, and also with a framework for iOS. And we didn't really have, like, we wanted to try out the jnigen and didn't want to write a method channel based plugin for this. So we generated the bindings for this jar, and it just worked. We got all the top level public methods, and we could instantiate this class, instantiate the reading. To make that work with the platform view, you still have to do a bit of tricks. So obviously, the platform view that we're showing here, it's still just a classical platform view. So if I would go here to my PDF viewer and I would find my PDF view, you will find that this is essentially classical Android platform view from the Android service. Nothing really fancy here. On iOS, I'm using UIKit view, but in this particular implementation, I don't have the iOS demo. But in our app, where we are using exactly the same approach, we are you can just show a PDF view as a UI view, and it just works. So this works pretty well. The team behind this is super responsive. So for instance, on iOS, which I'm going to talk about later, we had some crashes, and they essentially fixed that over a weekend, which was amazing for us. All right, so that was a short demo for the jnigen. And I tried to make something a bit more production ready. So I have this app. It's a very, like, I would say low effort that I'm maintaining. And here I have a little demo of a library that I integrated with this one. So there is this library for Google Play that you can force update your users. And normally on on Android, it's quite easy to integrate with. For Flutter, there is a plugin that uses method channels, and sometimes, especially when you return to the app, it has this nasty bug that it loses connection to the broadcast receiver that should let you know that the update has been installed. And I implemented this using the JNI gen. So I got the Google Play library. I just added this as a dependency to my project, created my configuration file, and just generated this. And after that, I was able to just get access to this from my code, from my Dart code. And I'm going to show you this demo again. Let me go back here. And you will get access to the same code later after the presentation on my GitHub. But what is happening here is that I have my app update configuration. Where is it? Here. Here's my configuration for this. Obviously, it's a bit bigger than the demo that I've shown 5 minutes ago, because I had to explicitly add every class that I want to have access to. So I'm having my app update manager. I'm having all the listeners. So for instance, these are essentially type definitions, or like of every listener that this class exposes. And because on Android, you get these broadcast receivers that instantiate that they cannot instantiate a Dart instance, so you have to go through some workarounds to create classes that Java can instantiate for you, that then notify you on the Dart side that you can receive some data from the broadcast receiver. But in general, the code here, again, maybe a bit wordy, but in general, I'm going to show you where it starts. So check update. Update test, sorry. So here, this piece of code that I have here is basically one-to-one mapping from the Java code that is presented, or Kotlin code that is presented in the documentation for this library. So I'm just getting my Android context, which I'm getting from this helper function, and I'm creating my app update manager factory, and I'm passing my reference to my context. Then I'm just creating something like a task, which is a synchronous way to get updates, and I'm just adding my listener, and my listener that I have here. It's a very similar syntax to what you've seen a few minutes ago, where I'm just having my callback that will let me know that, for instance, my install status has been updated, or my update info has been updated. So this is, again, maybe not the cleanest syntax, but if you're building a plugin, you can hide it behind another layer, potentially, of a much nicer syntax. But in this particular case, for my purposes, it was just fine. And I'm getting all this data. It's all safely typed. So if something is nullable on the native side, you get a nullable variable. If it's more complex class, and if you add it to your JNI gen, you will get instance of this class that you can access methods and properties, which is amazing. And it works pretty well. Yep. And obviously the next question is, what about iOS? What about Objective-C? What about Swift? Probably no one asks about Objective-C, but like the library that I mentioned that we are consuming from this vendor, it's written in Objective-C. So the headers that we are getting are in Objective-C. So for us, it was actually easier to integrate with that than to integrate with Swift. And this could be a nice sidebar about how Objective-C actually works and why there is C in Objective-C. But if you remember that Dart FFI is a way to invoke C libraries, and if Objective-C has a common ancestor with C, it means that potentially there is a way to go through C to Objective-C, and there's also a compatibility layer between Swift and Objective-C. So through the Objective-C, you can also go to Swift. So you can already imagine that the way from Dart to Swift is not going to be direct invocation of Swift code for now. It's going to be a little bit roundabout, but it will work, and you will be able to access Swift as well. So I'm going to show you a bit of a snippet of how it looks like. So I have the Objective-C demo here. Nothing really fancy. And just to show you that although JNI-Gen is pretty ready to use in production, the Objective-C and Swift Interop, it could benefit from some attention and love. So Objective-C, pretty good, like it still goes through the FFI, but the Swift, not so much. So I was exploring some ways, and I'm just gonna show you the configuration that I went through. So I tried different APIs, like AV Audio Player, Health Kit, I tried Calendar, all the different kind of ideas that I had. What it would be cool to access through from macOS or iOS. And because iOS and macOS share a lot of common code, potentially you can just access that. Like for instance, in my particular case, you can access NS user defaults practically the same way on iOS and on Mac. So here, very simple snippet where I'm just trying to access NS user defaults. This is essentially shared preferences, what is behind shared preferences on iOS and Mac. And as you can see, this is asynchronous call. Again, no await here. And I'm just getting my user defaults and reading a string for this key Flutter Krakow. So we can set this key to whatever you want. So I'm waiting for some suggestions. What do you want to put this into this key? 3, 2, 1. Pizza. That's great. So we're going to run this now. And the name is play audio because this was a sample for playing audio. But here's pizza. And it's super small. I hope this pizza on the event is going to be bigger. And with that, we're going to wrap. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer. Thanks. No hands? No questions? Or do we want to use a mic for questions?
I'm looking for the mic.
Huh?
Definitely there are questions on the audio side.
Yeah, there's some questions. Perfect. What was great, I was seeing some people nodding all the time. It's gonna be cool to chat with you because it seems like we're sharing the same experiences. I would call it like that. So feel free to approach later as well.
Yeah, I saw like summarizer. What does it mean? Like in this structure of the how to build, like in this builder.
Yeah, summarizer. Yeah.
Yeah, summarizer.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So where I can find it the best way here, JNI-Gen. So we can see summarizer backend ASM. I have no clue what is it. But if you go to the very great repository, Dart/lang/native. By the way, it's kind of crazy to see the cross. Anyway, this is the repo. That is the source of all the information that you can have about this. And what is great is that if you just ask, they will answer practically the same day. There's no unanswered issue. And this is also great because if you go to this talk, how can I open this? I know. I'm going to go to my own website. So here, if you go to this talk, the past, present, and future of native Interop, these are the guys that are responsible for that. And they are the most friendly people you can find to talk about Dart. I've been asking them and some of their colleagues all sorts of different questions about this, and probably they will be able to answer the summarizer. I know that there's a couple of different ways for that, so if you go back to the repo and we find summarizer.
Why actually ask Copilot?
I don't want my job to be taken away, like the Google search. Or
Just ask. That's the search.
Anyway, I know you're trying to kind of promote AI and stuff like that, but
you can ask Gemini in your Android studio.
yeah, I probably have it here somewhere in my Android studio. I'm old school, sorry. But yeah, this is the source of, I would say, knowledge for this one. And I'm just using the default here. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, second question. Okay. Okay, hello.
Hi.
Thank you for this great talk. I talked some months ago about the Pigeon and especially connection with the Kotlin multi-platform, but what's the question for now? So should we get an intuition or some for sure information that now we can try to create perfect PDF viewer or camera with real-time preview with this Flutter Gen
Yeah. So you're 100% correct. We should try doing that. Like the team behind us is looking for feedback. So for instance, trying to access the camera to API. That is a great use case for this because camera 2 from Android X, it's like, camera X API from Android X, it's like a standalone library that you can potentially create bindings for. And possibly you can invoke these and create Dart bindings for this library the same way as I did for the PDF plugin. Obviously, Camera X is probably a quite wide surface area, quite a big surface area. So we can try with something simpler like I tried with the Google Play libraries. And there is nothing preventing us from having official Google Play libraries right now for instance, app reviews, for in-app update, for install ID, right? Things like that. And because they are very isolated small libraries and you can use them directly. And again, this is not kind of confirmed or anything, but I believe that this would be the proposed way from Flutter to have a world-class native interop. They have mentioned this on a couple of events. I think the latest one. There was a suggestion that the native interop is going to be the main focus for this year. We'll see how it goes with the AI and kind of all that stuff that tries to, because of what, like, or material, because it may some impact on the priorities. But if we are not using that, they will not work on this. So we have to use it. We have to provide some feedback. And I think, like in my case, I'm preferring right now, if possible, if I need to integrate with some native library, to try with JNI Gen first. Because for Kotlin and Java, it works pretty well. For instance, mapping between different data types, it worked very well. Disposing objects, there is a synchronization. So for instance, if the Dart object gets disposed, there is a finalizer on the class that also disposes the Java object and vice versa. So we know that, for instance, a given object has been removed from the memory heap and so on and so forth. So these things work. It's a little bit worse on iOS, but at the same time, I think iOS typically it's easier to integrate with because the APIs are quite constrained. You don't really have that big surface area as you have on Android.
Quickly. So I think this is worth to mention. We not always, not only gain the performance of the camera, but Camera X has own use cases, so simplified recipes for some usage of cameras. So this is extra bonus, from Android.
Yeah, you can just
library.
Open the documentation.
So we lose some time to writing these connections, but we gain some simplified from the library. But I wanted to follow up for this writing interfaces. For me, it looked as much complicated and both structured as I have seen today as writing this piece of shitty connection with Pigeon. So
I feel you. So
I think we will have the same problems in the large projects.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there is an issue for that. I think it's interface issues. So for instance, that's not this one. Anyway, I'm not going to look for that. But this really annoying interface definition that you have to create and define whether a given method needs to be async or not async, it's on the roadmap. So for instance, Hossein, who is working on that, he expressed the same feeling as you. Like, this is too verbose. What I should be able to do is that I have my definition, I have my JNI Gen code, JNI Gen definition, I point to a class, and I'm getting this class, and if I have to receive some data as a listener, as a callback, I can just pass a Dart instance without, or maybe just extending some already generated class. I should not have to do it the way I did this here, or like creating special classes in Java or Kotlin to create that. But again, if we are not using that, they will not have incentive to work on improvements here, and there is nothing preventing them from kind of creating this interface, this abstract class for us as well, because they know exactly what kind of methods are on the objects. I mean, Java is quite unique in the sense that you can introspect all of these methods and classes and blah, blah, blah. Like, this is way beyond my understanding, but it can happen. And like, we express the same thing where it's a bit too verbose, but it works right now. So I think that's a compelling reason to actually try, because if you have to write a lot of manual parsing or pigeon definition, or a bit of maybe even a comparable amount of interface code, I would prefer to have the synchronous access and shared memory heap and stuff like that, rather than to continue a little bit error-prone method channels or something like that. Again, I'm biased. This is super exciting to me. Probably for some companies or some teams, it may be a bit too risky, a bit too on the edge.
Okay, I think I saw two more hands. Sorry.
Hi, thank
Hello.
you for the great talk. And I saw maybe that in latest Flutter, yeah, I'm here.
Here, hey,
Yeah.
nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. In the latest Flutter release, it was announced that Flutter moved all Dart running from UI thread to, like, if I'm correct, to main thread or background thread. And question how this affected all this, like, plugins and native Interop feature.
That's a really good question. So I think in 3.27 or in 3.29, which was one of the last stable releases, Flutter team announced that they merged platform and UI thread. So before that, you had a separate thread on which Flutter would run, which was called platform thread, UI thread, and then there was platform thread. And there is some nuance to what is platform thread and UI thread on Android and iOS. But in general, right now, both Flutter code and plugin code run on the same thread, which has some impact on maybe not essentially performance, but on how you design your plugins. Before that, if you would have any blocking code in your plugin, let's say you would have you would pass some data through the method channel, and then you would do some blocking operation like writing to the database or writing to a file. It would not block your Flutter UI. It would be running on a separate thread. Currently, if you have any blocking operation that runs in your plugin, it will block your Flutter UI, which is a significant change. I think it wasn't announced broadly enough. Like, we got hit by this because we have a bit of, like, anytime you get, for instance, biometric data from the device, we would process that and save to the database and so on and so forth, and that would lead to frame drops. So we had to make sure that if we are doing any sort of database operations, we are passing it to the background thread. So on our plugin, we had to make sure that we no longer do any blocking operations, or like, even if it's a blocking, it shouldn't take more than it takes to render a single frame. Because obviously, if you just write some small data to the file, it will not be noticeable. But in our case, when we did a bit of processing, we had to make sure to run it on the background thread. Same applies on iOS. And that is obviously something that we need to be aware, and it will affect the same, like, the approach here is exactly the same for the JNI Gen. You should be able to run it on the background thread. And I think there is, like, if you look at the, where I had this Objective-C plugin presentation here, context. So here, I believe, sorry, I'm not going to look for that right now, but there is an example showing how you can instantiate this class on the background thread, so that it's no longer on the same thread. and the synchronization between the object on the Dart side on the Java side is done by the JNI. And if you do some sort of blocking operation on that class, it will be asynchronous on the Dart side, which I think, for instance, these callbacks, again, not really sure how it works technically, but you can define whether this is async or not. If I would do this false, it's no longer async, and I think that could be potentially blocking. But if I do this as true, I think it will access this on a separate thread. Again, not really sure, but I know that there is a way in the JNI and JNI gen to define the behavior here. Again, another topic that we could spend long minutes on. And I know that we are getting ready for pizza, right? So, yeah.
That's correct. That's right.
Unless there is any more questions. One more. Okay, perfect. We have time for one more question.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was interesting.
Thank you so much.
I noticed that you using fallbacks to obtain Android context in the Dart code. So don't you think that this approach bring the all platform differences to the Dart code?
Oh, yeah.
And it's a bit tricky, and probably the best way for now it's keep platform channels to keep native differences on the native side, because it's looks like a bit tricky situation from the design.
You're 100% correct. So this was essentially my explicit choice that I'm bringing the Android specifics to Dart. And obviously, we can have a long conversation. What does it mean to a Dart developer if they have to operate on that? And I've been a long-time supporter of Flutter and Dart developers considering themselves to be iOS and Android developers. I'm urging anyone who works on the Flutter project to try to understand how the underlying native code works, and don't blindly sort of consume some libraries or packages that try to abstract away. I think the best example for that is notifications. Notifications work completely differently on Android and on iOS. And same with permissions probably, but these have very different patterns and use cases and so on and so forth. And there's a couple of great libraries that try to abstract away all of that, where you just want to show a notification, you show a notification, you want to schedule a notification, you schedule. But in fact, if you really want to use that, the documentation for that is going to be like 1 hour long reading, not only just implementing, but like just to read it through it would be like almost an hour. So what I'm saying here is that if we try to abstract away and hide everything, let's say behind a platform channel, that can probably work if you just want to consume something and don't really worry about the underlying implementation. But I think it's for the better to actually have this sort of understanding. And if you have this understanding, then there is no really that internal blockade in yourself to bring it this differences into Dart. If you're building a platform view, you have to make this difference on the Dart side. You either run UIKit view or Android view, and it's already an if-else statement. And obviously, if you would just bash everything together into a single class that deals with Android and iOS, that can be tricky. But like in our case, like the library that we used, we just defined Android client, iOS client, defined the interface on the Dart side. Again, I can show it to you. That doesn't really prevent me from doing that. If I would do yeah, I think this will be fine. So we have generated the Android part. We have generated the iOS part. We have our interface that is an abstract class, and then for each of these we just have implementation of this one and just passing this data to the native implementation. And obviously with a proper architecture you are able to still bring the platform specifics to that, to Dart, but benefit from the fact that I can just stay in Dart, implement this code in the language that I prefer. Obviously, Kotlin and Swift and Objective-C, they have their own benefits and problems, but there's such a big difference in being able to just stay in the same, and I open my iOS, I open my Android side by side, right? And I can just go line by line and see for myself, like what is here, just go, like my logs are exactly the same, and so on and so forth. And then I'm just exposing this as another sort of layer that is a sort, I'm trying to make a common denominator out of all of that. And yeah, hopefully I convinced you a little bit that there's no big problem with that.
Yeah, it's okay. So it's pretty neat. I like the approach. You hide all this stuff under another Flutter package. So you build like a Flutter plugin separate and hide this stuff under it and use
so
it.
The architectural question here is very important. How we approach it could be dozen different ways. For us, this has been a blessing to be able to access this from Dart as if this was a normal Dart code. Obviously, underneath this is Objective-C and Java.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
See you on the break. Thanks.